outside David Roman to give an introduction to the project they conducted here in Sri Lanka as well as in Thailand to investigate the association for the role of Buddhism in biodiversity conservation. He is actually that Professor David Lohman is the assistant professor, Lohman Lab Department of Biology, City College of New York. He is also a research fellow of National University of Singapore 2006 to 2009, and also a postdoc research in Harvard University 2004 to 2005. This is our privilege to invite Professor David Lohman.
Thank you very much. It's fantastic to be here today, and I'm very glad to see so many people in the audience, particularly students. Today, in this beginning 15-minute session in which I'll be speaking, I want to talk a little bit about my motivations and our motivations for the project that you'll learn more about later today. But first, I want to acknowledge that the relationship between Buddhism and ecology, or Buddhism and conservation, has been explored for quite a long time. And as this becomes more of an interest for me, I'm learning more and more about what has come before. But I'm fairly confident that the work that I'll talk about, that we have done, is unique, and in that it is motivated by biology. So, in talking about our motivations, I want to start with the very general and then move to things that are more specific. I think we could all agree that there are many problems in the world right now, such as poverty, armed conflicts, global climate change, of course, the loss of biodiversity. And personally, I think all of these things are very important problems. But as a biologist, the one that is most closely allied to what I do is, of course, the loss of species and the loss of biodiversity. Now, as a scientist, I can, and as someone whose specialty is butterflies, I can go to a forest that's just been cut down, and I can tell you what should be there. And I can look in the literature and get an equation and go out and make some measurements and go to a small forest and tell you about how long it will take for most of the species to go extinct based on past theory. I can also look at predictors based on weather and economics and try and tell you just how long it will be before you won't have any more forests. But what I cannot do as a biologist, for the most part, is stop any of that from happening. The problem of conserving biodiversity and the problem of stopping the extinction of species is much greater than biology. It is probably one of the most multidisciplinary endeavors that exists. Biologists alone cannot solve this problem. Together, we need to bring political scientists, as well as politicians, business leaders, and of course religious leaders together to talk about how human society as a whole can help stem this problem. Now, another facet of the problem of biodiversity loss is that, having said this, the problem is multifaceted. I need to reach out beyond biology to speak with other people. So I could write my congressperson, or I could, in the United States, which is where I'm from, or I could contact businesses in the United States, in New York City, where there are a lot of businesses. But the problem there is that would be addressing a very small part of the problem. More than half of all the species on this planet live in tropical forests. Tropical forests themselves occupy a very small part of the land. About 10% of the land on the planet is tropical forests, and about half of all species live in those forests. Nearly all tropical forests are in developing countries only. The only two countries in the world that have developed economies and also have tropical forests are Australia, which has just a tiny little forest, and Singapore, which has virtually nothing left. So the problem of conserving most of the species falls upon the people in societies that can probably least afford to do so because they're in developing economies. So this presents a challenge that we need to bring together people from all walks of life and all different kinds of countries together to help address this problem of biodiversity conservation. And it's a serious problem, but I think that that it's very tractable and progress can be made. And I was very heartened, I was very encouraged by a book that was published a few years ago by one of my heroes of biology, E.O. Wilson, called The Creation. And this was a book about the intersection of religion and conservation. One of the main problems with conservation is education. Many people don't realize how important biodiversity is to the health of ecosystems, the health of agriculture, and so forth. But to properly educate the people that need to know this information would take so long that by the time we did it, there would be absolutely nothing left. And so religion is a way that we can reach out to people's minds and hearts quickly to help spread this message about the need for conservation. So I have lived and worked in Thailand for many years. I speak Thai and I'm an official translator for the government. And so I am familiar with Theravada Buddhism because 95% of the people in Thailand are Theravada Buddhists. And so it struck me that this would be an excellent opportunity to explore the role between Buddhism and biodiversity conservation, particularly in the northeastern part of the country, which has been the rice basket of Asia for over 300 years. There's a lot of agriculture in the northeast, and there's very little forest left. And so when I say we, I mean myself, and at that time my collaborator at Harvard University and also in Thailand, tried to think of ways that we could fund this kind of research, because it's not quite science, it's not quite humanities, it's not quite social science. Not many people want to give money to pay the salaries for people to do this work. But then we were able to get a grant from Harvard University to start the first study, and we wanted to first look to see what role have forest monasteries played in biodiversity conservation so far. In other words, how many species are present inside the temples as opposed to the outside? And how important are they really for preserving the species that live there? Now, when I say biodiversity, I mean bacteria and birds and ants and butterflies and mammals and bats. But it's impractical to study all of those things at the same time. And also, if we're working in Buddhist temples, many of those things can only be identified when they're dead. So, for example, in order to really identify an ant, you first have to kill it. So we chose two organisms that we could survey without having to harm them at all, and that's birds and butterflies. Both of them can be identified when they're still alive. And so using those two focal taxa, we surveyed in Thailand inside and outside the temples, and the differences were absolutely amazing. Probably 5 times more species inside temples than outside. The outside of the temples, we only found the most common species, and we only found the rare species inside temples. Moreover, we found the largest troop of macaques in Thailand that was known as now known. Many range extensions for birds, and many other sort of surprising findings. But at that time, the only thing we did was to survey birds and butterflies. But it was the comments made by the monks and by the villagers that was extremely interesting. For example, comments from monks would say things like, we know that people need to come in here to sustainably harvest certain things, like mushrooms, but we only allow them to harvest it from one portion of the temple, but not the whole thing, so that if they won't completely kill everything, this allows the existing forest that is untouched to replant the part from which we allow people to harvest some forest products. This is a lesson from conservation that we've only recently learned, and Buddhist monks in Thailand have been doing this for dozens or hundreds of years. So it made me wonder how many other conservation lessons could be possibly learned by asking people who live in the forest all the time. And so this spurred the second part of this project, which was to go around and ask Buddhist monks and also villagers around temples about biodiversity and their attitudes about conservation. And in order to examine the effects both of the local culture and of religion, we decided to compare Thailand and Sri Lanka. Luckily, I had just finished a postdoc in Singapore, where my desk was right next to Anoka Kudatana's desk, and I had a good friend I knew who would be willing to help with the Sri Lankan portion of this study, because although I know Thailand reasonably well, I still don't know very much about Sri Lanka and its culture. So we partnered together, and then together with Professor Kurigama, we're able to survey here to completely replicate the whole study that we did in Thailand. So in Thailand, we surveyed 50 temples inside and outside for birds and butterflies, asked questionnaires of monks and villagers, and we did the whole thing here as well. And so that will allow us to assess the role of temples and conservation in the two countries, and also to compare the two countries to look at the relative importance of culture versus religion. And the results I found to be quite surprising. There were differences that I was never expecting, but you'll hear about that later today when I talk about the results. And I just want to say I'm very glad that there are so many people here, and I hope that this day in which we bring together people from all different backgrounds and from all different areas of study and philosophy to think about a common issue, I think is very important, and glad to be here.
Thank you. Swami Mantra Paramit Pasur Swami Mantra Chindamani Adani Samatani Biodiversity Samantha Buddhism Vision Master Preparation Sri Lanka be Sankar Arana Swami Mantra Bhumika me Biodiversity Sanction Devani Thailand is maintainable Sami Baya Chaham Harapino Kai Belgian Harapin Unham Unhan ke Manara Nivel Subhave Sam Lansada Bumba River. Vision Mahaja Nikin Hidua may Palestine Pala then we when Sima Novi may be by the Samvaja, Pulu Samvaja Purnagaya. Better period of Sakarana, Abbey Swami Mahansela, who are going to pass the words and Panther into Homer, David the Sandakan, Samantha Pergan, and again. These are the Samara the same of Sunday. In the Pasur, Matantan Yabi made Udagana, Yabi Kantavi, Bunkavi, Bandabe, Buddhism and biodiversity conservation history. Itihas Komade Abdano, Raja, now in Namper, Putamabu, Minasir, Odin, Tigani, Validi, Sarasate. The Itihas of the Gabru, Danish Superman, Samwadi Baluka. It was also the Pasu, Vidya, Sanam, Asudam, me somebody complicated with the Sarah activity. It was my foundation in the Kala, Siu the Nakura, whether we run Sakaskar Gandhi, and if you look at the Gandhi, mean Sandashani, it is the name of Tavi, they sometimes Chita and I. And in 10 minutes time, I think we start the second session. Running out of what activity we have method of the hand one answer. That's what I'm looking at. Representing the biodiversity and Buddhism, historical perspective.